There are unforgettable, inexplicable things throughout our world which can only be experienced. The velvety softness of the breeze, the silence of the mountains, the breathtaking splendor of the sunset against the horizon, and a most special one in the person of dear Sister Mary DeBacco. These were the words of Sister Mary Xavier, the new regional superior of India, on Sister Mary's last trip to India. It's good that we are together again and to bring Sister Mary to mind. Thank you, Monsignor Hart. Should be pleased you're here. Sister Shenza, dear sisters, Elsie, Angie, Marilyn, Teresa. Sister Shenza asked me to give another reflection on Sister Mary, especially for those that were unable to attend her funeral mass. So some of the thoughts that I'm expressing are from the other day, and some of them are new ones, and I promise to go slower. What joy it would bring Sister Mary just to be with all of you. She truly loved all of you. But who was this loving woman, Sister Mary DeBacco, this wonderful, extraordinary Maestra Pia, so loved by all? Mary Anna Teresa DeBacco was so proud to be the daughter of two wonderful people, Teresa Bovo and Angelo DeBacco, from Arting, Provincia di Belluno. Her strength and purity much as displayed in the incredible Dolomite Mountains that surrounded her village. What a wonderful Christian family. They are the most loving, quiet, humble, generous Christians you'll ever have the pleasure to meet. Proud of her Newark heritage, Sister Mary and her siblings, Paul, Elsie, and Angela, all attended St. Francis Xavier School. At the time, there were German, Irish, American sisters running the school, so it wasn't easy for three children who spoke Italian. But thanks to the families of Sister Vilma Cosini and Sister Grace Zizza, they all thrived. Sister Mary went on to Central High School and was always so proud that her teachers would acknowledge, "We know that you went to Catholic school," as manifested by her work ethic, her penmanship, and her caring ways. Always a leader, she flourished in academics, student council, and as the drum majorette of a 400-piece band, unmistakable hints of a future general. Graduating from high school and landing a job as a legal secretary was a joy for her. She relished telling the story of how her boss, a Jewish lawyer, had married a Catholic girl. And when he would call her in for stenography, he'd say, "Mary, put that book away." And he would take out his catechism from the top drawer, and she would instruct him in the faith. As time went on, the Filipino sisters were now in charge of St. Francis Xavier. And it wasn't long before Sister Margarita Marchioni got her hands on Sister Mary. She saw her at Mass every day and invited her for retreat. And not long after, Sister Mary entered the Religious Teachers Filipini. It wasn't easy for young postulant Mary. She hated to take off her red dress and her nice shoes and put on the black postulant garb. But with the gentle persuasion of Sister Margaret Piero and the help of her group, she was soon into her new and wonderful life. Ironically, she entered just at the time of Archbishop Walsh's funeral, so she quickly learned and lived the great history of the Institute. Sister Mary became a teacher in Holy Rosary, Jersey City. She was so shy, she would teach from the back of the room until Sister Violetta got a hold of her and gave her a few lessons. Perhaps you remember the time there was a program to honor Sister Mary before she left for Rome. There was a large chest full of hats that Sister Mary wore, and different sisters would take the hat out of the chest. The first was the hat of a very good teacher. Many students faithfully have kept in touch with her to this day. Next became the provincial secretary for Sister Elizabeth Parente. She was formative for many of us young novices and junior professed sisters, the superior of Villa Walsh, the foundress of the Sister Sale, provincial counselor, provincial treasurer, provincial superior, general counselor, general secretary, stepped in as general treasurer when Sister Anina became ill, and ultimately general superior. I don't know if there was ever any other maestra who held every position in the Institute. I forgot the Hallmark hat. Once she mentioned to her brother she'd like to give each sister something for Christmas. You know the rest. We and the children received Hallmark goods for the next 20 years, for every occasion. God bless Paul. She loved him and missed him so much. She was a real person. Perhaps you didn't know these things. Her favorite movie was A Man for All Seasons, The Life of Thomas More, and Home Alone 1. Her favorite song was Nessun Dorma and My Way by Frank Sinatra. Her favorite authors, Thomas Merton and Charles Schulz of Snoopy fame. And remember when they had the CB radios in the cars? My brother had given her one, and on our long trips, her handle was Sweet Sister, and she'd start out, breaker, breaker, this is Sweet Sister, so out of character, and she could chat it up to the best of the truckers. Now, this is all a very nice resume, but what did she really do, the good that she did? These past days, and it's been days, people are still calling. They've come and phoned me and telling me the good things and generous deeds that she's done. She helped so many of their family members, made their faith stronger, saved their marriage, fed their children. And sisters have come up and said, she's been the one, she had trust in me to make me a superior or a principal. A former student of Sister Mary's, perhaps you remember her, Patty Casandino. She called yesterday and was so saddened by the death of Sister Mary. She expressed the image of Sister Mary so well. She said she was like royalty. She said we were 14 years old, but we sat there and revered her. Her benchmarks were so high, but she helped us to attain them. Her smile, as Monsignor brought out, that unconditional love, her wisdom drew so many to her. It's what drew little children to jump in her laps or adults to sit by her side and tell her all their sorrows. She didn't always have the answers, but all left with peace, knowing that she would pray for them. Okay. Coincidentally, a former MPF, one of her prison boys, called and said the exact same thing. She treated us like real people with dignity. That boy is now practicing Catholic and lector in his church. She loved teaching in the prison. One time she went to the warden and was asking him some questions, and she asked him, do you think the boys ever lie to me? His laughing, howling response, sister, they all lie. Formation. How many of us were under her loving guidance? She provided the best of the best, Monsignor Turo, Father Grichel, Father Chiswick, Father Couture, and her own conferences so meticulously prepared, and our private conferences, often many tears, but always ending in joy. Many provincials and generals often dread going on the ascolto, visiting the local houses. Oddly enough, Sister Mary loved to do them. She loved to do them with the sisters in the States and the sisters throughout the world. You remember well what a good listener she was, and how she responded in the most gracious manner, yet she could be firm when needed. After visiting a convent, she'd take the time to visit the mother of the sister who told her she was sick, gave some money to a sister's brother having hard times, helped someone's family member find work, and calling the sisters that were struggling with some issue in their convent. It was the same throughout the world. In Italy, it became a little more fun. She loved bread. So whatever paese we went to visit, my job was to go to the forno and find the bread of that area. So when she was done, we would go home. No matter how late it was, we would get home sometimes at 2 in the morning. The sisters would be waiting, and we would have the bread and talk about what was going on, and it was just a very good time. Not to mention the limoncello party on New Year's Day. Each house would bring their homemade limoncello, and Sister Mary would have to decide which one was the best. Let me tell you a few stories that maybe perhaps you haven't heard. Sister Mary and the popes. When Sister Mary became general, as our institute is pontifical, the new general is always presented to the Holy Father. The term general. As Sister Mary and the capitulars of the general chapter entered the bronze doors, the Swiss guards saluted her, clicked their heels, and said, Madre Generale. Then all along the way, we'd meet the guards, all the way up to the sala where we met the Holy Father. The Swiss guards would salute her and say, Madre Generale. As we entered the sala, Monsignor Stanislaus, now Cardinal, the Pope's secretary, greeted us and positioned Sister Mary by these huge doors and said, wait here, he'll be coming soon. And we all stood in a circle in that large room. The door slowly slid open and Pope John Paul II, now saint, enters. He gives his hand to Sister Mary and says loudly, DeBacco, congratulations. This was the beginning of a wonderful friendship with a saint. She then had to introduce each of the capitulars we're at the chapter to the Holy Father. Sister Dolores had been working with Sister Vilma for a few days, teaching her Polish phrases. So it was Vilma's time. So Sister Mary introduced the Holy Father to Vilma, and she forgot everything, and she goes, "Nastrovia." And he laughed, and he said, "Oh, are we going to have a drink?" There are so many John Paul II stories, but just one more. The Holy Father knew we were going to Albania. He called for Sister Mary to come over. We waited in a sala in the Vatican, again with Monsignor Stanislaw, until he arrived, and Pope John Paul II entered again. This time he said, "DeBacco," and he gave her a big hug. And he gave her money to help us open the mission in Albania. He really enjoyed speaking with Sister Mary, especially at Castel Gandolfo. So much so that she was invited to his bedroom the morning after he died. Only the doctor, Monsignor Stanislaus, Sister Tobiana, and a few others were in the room. Pope Benedict. Before becoming Pope, he was known as the Rottweiler because his job was to reform the seminaries in Brazil. Poor Sister Mary had the same problem. She was trying to reform our sisters in Brazil. Once a week, Sister Mary would go to confession at St. Peter's. We'd go down, and we always entered from the left side in St. Peter's Square. You know how you walk across that square. We entered on the left, and Pope Benedict, then Cardinal Benedict, would be walking from the side of Borgo Pio, and he would walk to the middle, and Sister Mary would walk to the middle. But in a different tone, he'd go, "DeBacco." Just so sweet. How happy she was when he became the Holy Father. And in our missions, there's so many stories. One last story. We were opening a new house in a place called Jubilee Nagar. It was 2 hours from the mother house. At this time, there was no school, only a large hut for the sisters. They would teach outside under the trees until the mission was fully established. Many mothers and children had gathered around. Sister Mary, sitting in the shade of the overhang of the hut, about 110 degrees. Sister Mary was speaking to the ladies. They were all coolie laborers, making less than $1 a day, all with many children. Sister Mary explained we would have a school and their children would all get an education. And we hear a swish, swish sound. And Mother says to them, "What's that sound?" And they all go, "Tom B." So she kept talking to the women, and we'd hear it again, swish, swish, and all the ladies would go, "Tom B." So we didn't know whether it was a snake or what it was. All of a sudden, this little guy, about 4 years old, pushing himself with his hands, his legs didn't work, and you'd hear this swish, swish. He drags himself right up to Sister Mary, starts kissing her feet. It was one of the most, I can't even describe it adequately pathetic, heartwarming remembrance that I have. We were all crying. Mother gives the order to get him a doctor, and he will eat with the sisters until he is well. Today he's walking in college. He and his mother would make the trip to Janampet to visit Sister Mary whenever he heard she was back in India. We could go on with endless stories of her life and her loving of others. Let me stop here. At dinner, you can continue with your own stories of her goodness. Her strength and courage came from her constant working with herself, her deep spirit of prayer, her love and devotion to the Blessed Mother and St. Lucy Filippini, and using her authority always for the good of others. She was esteemed by popes and lepers, and we all here all loved her so. We find in the letter of St. Peter, what we await are the new heavens and a new earth where, according to his promise, the justice of God will reside. Let me end in Sister Mary's own words. We are so grateful for today's outpouring of love. Let each of us place the gift of ourselves on your altar, dearest Lord. It was you who gave us life. It was you who called us to yourself. And like Lucy, had we 1,000 lives, our choices would always be the same. There could be none other. There would be no other way. And with our hearts overflowing with gratitude, we make our own this beautiful prayer for all that has been. Thanks for all that will be. Yes.